Welcome everyone to RC lesson number 9. Today's subject is going to be taking a first step towards structural reading, which might sound odd because this is something that I've been talking about, at least structural reading, as sort of an end goal for you guys this whole time. But we'll get into the next slide as to why I decided to stop and make this one today. So this is going to feel much less like a normal full-on lesson where I usually have some objective and then I pick a passage that I feel demonstrates it to an extent and then we just kind of go through the whole thing. So it's going to feel less like that and more of a very specific targeted study strategy. But that's exactly why I made this because I think this is something that you guys have been asking me for without knowing that that's what you explicitly wanted. So just about every day, and on occasion multiple times per day, I do get emails from you guys to the effect of, so I get what the end result of structural reading is supposed to look like. And many times I can actually pull it off myself, but what do I do on, insert here complicated passage? My brain just melted when I saw all these science words, all these art words, or something to that effect, right? And I want to say this is a valid concern. In fact, it's kind of the crux of the matter. So much of instruction in this field feels like, okay, so I know where I'm supposed to end up. I'm supposed to end up at X point. How do I get there from where I am now? And that's what we're going to be covering. So I just want to point out here that every time you get those brain melt crises in RC, that's an opportunity to practice this. So to that effect, I will repeat the advice that I recently gave to one of my one-on-one folks. When reading a passage and your brain just refuses to engage with complex detail, you read it, but then you just kind of zone out because you don't get it, and it's one of those scenarios where you would have to read it like 3 or 4 times to get anything out of it. When that happens, let it happen. Don't force yourself to understand it. So this kind of goes back to what I've been consistently saying. When I say don't reread things and stop and ask different questions, that's exactly the kind of moment I'm talking about. So that could, it's different for everybody, especially RC, just because the passages can cover quite a broad range of topics and vocabulary and writing styles. It's hard to say universally. Some passages, of course, are universally recognized as worse than others, but you'd be surprised by how individual it really is when it comes to these brain melt moments. And and again, something that I've been saying this whole time, I hate to break it to you, but if you didn't get it the first time, pretty much all of you, 99.9% of you, still won't get it the third or fourth time. You'll feel like you will, just because that's what happens to smart people. Most of the time, we feel like we read things 2 or 3 times. Okay, I get it now. All you've done is really just process the words, not really the ideas most of the time. So yeah, as I was saying, when your brain wants to check out, let it check out, but don't just totally check out the passage. This is where the opportunity comes in. When the checkout moment happens, don't force yourself to reread it and really try to just, get the reading comprehension task in. Do the following three things in this order. First thing, name whatever it is that you're having trouble with. So if it's a complicated detail, the one I most recently did with a student was a one that I've read a video on, which is the that silly riddled basins of attraction uh, passage. Uh, and then if you don't really understand that particular concept, just note the name, squish it down to just a name. Don't try to understand what it is, just understand that it's there. So yeah, that concept, give it a name. Whatever you're having trouble dealing with, whatever your brain wants to melt on, back off a second. Don't really try to understand what it is, just understand what its name is or what you want to call it. And that could be whatever you want. Obviously, it's better if you take it from the passage itself just to maintain accuracy and relevance, but you can end up naming it whatever you want so long as you know that's what it stands for. After you've done that, the next step is to ask attribution type questions regarding whatever detail it was. So these kinds of questions are, who actually said this detail? Who or what position does this detail help or hurt? Does the author like this detail? That sort of thing. Just ask these kinds of questions. And step number 3, really only you need to do if step number 2 gives you absolutely nothing. So if number 2, as we just described, if that is hard to do, don't be too persistent. Give up fairly quickly. If those questions or the answers to those questions don't feel that forthcoming, don't try to push it too hard. Whenever that happens, so in such cases, just merely note where that pesky detail is in the passage, so you can research it later in the context of a question or answer choice. Just like in LG, sometimes having an answer a question to bounce the detail against. That helps instead of trying to deal with just the detail itself on its own with no further context. You guys have seen that at work, hopefully in LG, right? Where there are deductions that you can get if you really sat there and did it in the abstract before you looked at any questions. But why do that when the questions can guide you closer to the end goal? That it's a very similar thing going on here. But to successfully let the questions and answer choices help you in RC, the thing that you do have to do is what step three says here. Is that if you can't figure it out the important attributional logical um, data points about this particularly pesky detail, you at least have to just remember or note where that detail appears so you can research it as a question demands. So how do you actually practice this task? Well, this is the suggestion that I have. And so again, just to have it up on this slide, here's the procedure that we just talked about. Step one, name that pesky detail, whatever it is causing the brain melt. Once you've done that, ask attribution type questions regarding that detail. And finally, if step two didn't work, merely note where that detail is in the passage. So to practice this procedure, pick any RC section, even the super old ones, and even including ones that you've done before, or remember struggling with. Anything is fair game. Take any RC section, read the passage as you normally would, completely untimed, and as soon as you hit those pesky details, stop. In writing now, note again, this is the exact same procedure, the name of the detail, any attributional data about that detail you think is useful, or failing that, merely where that detail is. So after you've done that, continue reading again, stopping to engage the above procedure every time you need to. So once you're done reading this in this manner, hit the questions, and I would still recommend them doing them on time because this is going to involve a couple unusual, not unusual, things you wouldn't probably do on test day. Uh, I also want to note before pushing further, obviously the value of doing questions you still remember or have done fairly recently is slightly diminished, but even if you do remember the correct response, if you can force yourself to justify that answer in a new manner that is actually replicable for you, there is value in that. So, what I'd like you to do here is just answer questions as you are able. But every time you kind of run into that detail or the things that didn't click with you the first time, see if the attribution data that you wrote down for step two helps at all when it comes to understanding how the whole thing fits together, where that detail sits in the overall pantheon of details in the passage, that sort of thing. And then also, again, if you didn't have attributional data, see if the locational data that you have with detail and any context from the question or answer choice helps you when the detail itself in the passage was so bad that you couldn't even extract attributional data. So again, at this point, go back and reread, go back and research and see if having extra information from both the way the question is asking and the way the answer choice is presenting that data, see if that provides you any clues as to how you're supposed to interpret that pesky detail. So I think most of you will manage to pull it off with less, smaller volume practice, but I'm thinking 5 entire RC sections done this way should suffice for just about everyone. In terms of, what is it sufficient for? In terms of giving it enough room to click, if it's going to click at all. So um, you do have to give things a fair shake to understand whether it's going to work. Trying it on one random passage, like, oh, this didn't work. That's usually not the best idea. So I'm thinking 5 entire sections is probably more than enough for most of you to see if this thing helps you. So we have reached the takeaway section, which is kind of uncharacteristically quick for RC. But here again is the procedure. Step one is to name the pesky detail. Step two is to ask attribution type questions regarding that detail. And step three is if number two didn't work, just merely note where that detail is in the passage. And so how to actually practice this? Again, I suggest using completely untimed RC sections from anywhere. Could be once done, could be super old, doesn't really matter. And 5 sections sounds like a good amount to do total. And again, the procedure when you are doing any one of those passages in any one of those 5 sections, read normally until you hit that pesky kind of detail. Write out your answers to steps one, two, and three of the procedure outlined above, and then resuming your normal reading until the next time pesky detail comes up. Try using the data that you recorded above to help you when you get to the questions. Uh, Ideally, the attribution data will end up proving so simple to you that just organically, without you even knowing what you're doing, you'll reach a point where it's not really necessary to write any of that down while you're doing timed work. Hopefully, that will happen over the course of the 5 sections. And I just want to note in closing that I intentionally kept explicit examples of attribution. I just pretty vague. I just threw out a couple sample questions that you could ask yourself, and I did that intentionally so as to leave you the most room to construct your own set of patterns and words to describe what's going on. Okay, so we've reached the end, and should be a familiar sight to all of you. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, do all the like, subscribe stuff, let people know. But as you guys have been doing, send me emails to this email address if you have any further questions. I'll see you guys in the next one.